Right, ladies and gentlemen, been a lot of mention of war there in that initial speech, and I think Liz wrote the introduction about 80 years of our military from VE Day, so it's very poignant at the moment because of war in Europe again and the Prime Minister's policy to seek a defence pact with the EU. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the inner workings on that. And I'm speaking from reference of lobbying personally in Parliament and the House of Lords, and I've met a great deal of our senior military officers over the years, and I've been in defence from an engineering perspective in Coventry for over 15 years. So lessons of war and lessons of battle. So your military fights the battle, and a country fights the war. It seems to be something that we have forgotten in terms of Parliament at the moment. As we know, it's a puppet Parliament, and there are reasons for that, and I'll go into it in a moment. But what we've got to look at from the context of Churchill and Clement Attlee in the wartime coalition are a couple of very key data points. Both Churchill and Clement Attlee were opposed to us being in the EU. Lord Attlee, in later years when he was interviewed, said that the EU was essentially a dictatorship of bureaucrats, and he was opposed to it. It was Clement Attlee that gave us NATO, and NATO was, not quite sure because it's becoming a bit woolly currently with this defence pact that Starmer's talking about with the EU, was the cornerstone of our defence. So currently His Majesty's government's policy in defence is that our armed forces are set as a deterrent force. Okay, and we can reference that very easily with what Admiral Sandy Woodward said in 2010 when David Cameron came in. Now, let's not forget David Cameron was pro-EU and he was also pro-China. That Admiral Woodward, who led the war in the Falklands, said that basically as a result of what David Cameron did at that point, that Britain's military could no longer do anything further than the Channel. Okay, so that's the context, all right? So we can go back a little bit further from Cameron into Tony Blair. So Tony Blair in 2000 initiated the European defence concept with Jacques Chirac. Now what Blair did was he was very, very good at this. He hid it all in plain view. None of you had any idea in this country what was going on in terms of how that support of the European defence concept. But it's actually called European Defence and Security Union. Clue in the title, Union. It is single, the concept is they want to have all of it in the EU zone, and that will potentially, because nobody's yet seen the inner workings of what Starmer is doing with this pact, all right? Now he's calling it a so-called pact. I'm going to submit that that's not what it is. What he's going to do is start the formal process after 25 years of it being hidden, okay? Nobody voted on this at all, ever. Was never anybody had any discussion over it. The only Prime Minister that was formally opposed to this previously was Margaret Thatcher. And it serviced after the Falklands War in 1984. Jacques Delors at a conference in Fontainebleau asked Maggie for three things. We want currency union, we want defence union, and we want to take the national veto away. Now I want you to bear in mind that recipe. That was 1984, okay? Particularly the no national veto. Because, jumping forward in time to now, Ursula von der Leyen has stated in terms that defence union will be single point command and control of all defence and security services, including coalface policing all the way through Europe, including one single European appointed defence contractor for all procurement, which is the common procurement. Okay, so Ursula stated all this in terms. This is not a secret in the EU, open conversation. It's been a secret here in the UK for quite a long while. Now, Maggie said no, no, no to this, to the three no's, right? To the three gambits of currency union, defence union, and taking the veto away, because there would be no sovereignty at all at the end of all of that. None. And we've already got a puppet parliament, as if that's not bad enough. So, Margaret Thatcher said, I'm not doing this because the destination of what's going to be what we're going to sign up to with this ever closer union in terms of defence and security is not clear. And she stated that at the dispatch box. The destination is not clear. Ladies and gentlemen, Ursula von der Leyen has stated in terms and made it very clear what the destination for this European Defence Union is. Make no bones about it. This is common knowledge in Brussels and Europe and in German and French circles. Okay? She wants it all. Their ambition, as former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, Brexit hero for us, their ambition is everything. Okay? And you cannot be in one bit of this defence union and not be in all of it. And it is the largest aggregation of acronyms known anywhere in the world. All right? So, and who do they put in charge of intelligence? Greece. I ask you, right? So, just sort of let that sink in for a minute. So, this defence pact I'm submitting to you that Starmer is signing is on the 19th, is the start of the formal process to unify and manage defence and security with the EU. Okay? Now, what he's not telling everyone is what the destination of that is. We're not going to have him on what he's doing because it was in the Labour Party manifesto, okay? And he's now in government, all right? The story politically is that a lot of this, since the Brexit period and the referendum period, has been done in apolitical silence. And the Uni Party has been okay with it. Most of the MPs have stood back, all right? A few stood up. And interesting things happened to a few of those MPs that stood up. Though I'm not going to name them because it's not fair, because some of them have suffered terribly. Okay? There are a few good MPs, not many, and they're certainly not standing up to this. Okay? A couple of the key ones that you would think would be all over this like a rash are all fully briefed and are silent. Now, in this country, silence is consent. Okay? So, interestingly, Jim Allister from Northern Ireland is trying to raise a debate on it and is being blocked by the parliamentary authorities to get a debate on it. So there's the sort of the context there. So what you have to understand is that defence and security were not included in the referendum or Brexit. They were completely separate, and the reasons for that were because, as I've said, Blair and Cameron had already got us in. We were already part way in. Now, does anybody here know who, during the Blair period, who was the head of EU military staff? This is at the period when there was a bit of sort of tittle-tattle about this EU army thing. That's not what it is. Don't use that reference. It's a complete cul-de-sac. It'll get you into trouble. It's Defence and Security Union. Anybody who's the head of EU military staff? Lieutenant General Sir David Leakey, senior British Army officer. Okay? All in plain view. What did Lieutenant General Sir David Leakey do when he was sort of finishing that job where he was head of EU military staff, right? At the time when they were saying there's no such thing as an EU army, it's a dangerous fantasy, I think Clegg said, didn't he? You know what he did after that? It was Black Rod in Parliament. Right, does anybody know where the headquarters for EU Navy was? Did you know the EU had a Navy? Do you know where the headquarters for the EU Navy was? Northwood. That's our joint British military headquarters. It was headquarters there, and it was headed up by senior Royal Marine two-star generals, some of which are now still in service with promotions. And it was promoted by Admiral Sir Philip Jones, the First Sea Lord. Now, I did have slides. They would be visually brilliant, but obviously we've got this IT problem, but the evidence is there, so you can't refute it. So, who built the EU's intelligence centre? Anyone? MI6. MI6. So you can see, over that period of Blair and Cameron, all this was going on, all right? There seems to be a threshold level of it now where, okay, game's up, context of war in Europe, and of course, it's the sovereign nations of Europe that have stood up to what's going on out there in the Ukraine, not the EU. The EU have dragged their feet. So we've got a contradiction with British government policy very quickly here with this, with Starmer, with what he's doing with the EU. So it's the destination that we really need to drill into. They don't like the exposure. A little exposure with this subject matter is a lot. Okay? It doesn't take a lot of pressure for interesting things to start happening. And as I said, I've been involved with a couple of campaigns, particularly with Theresa May. Now, Theresa May is an interesting one. She was trying to slip in a section in the back door, in the backstop, formally, to bring us into a defence union at that point. So you can see that a Tory government and a Labour government are absolutely on the same page, seamless. Now, the deal that Starmer is bringing forward is exactly the same deal that Theresa May was trying to slip through. And she's even brought back into government in order to do this the same civil servants, Ollie Robbins, who's now director at the FCDO. Okay? So just going to step back from that bit of it. Right, so inner workings. So who currently is in charge of our military? Don't say the king. No, so it's a guy called David Williams. He's the permanent secretary at the MOD. It used to be a guy called Lovegrove. I've had a bit to do with challenging him over my time. Interesting things happened there. He became NSA and now is in charge of AUKUS and our nuclear submarines. So the command chain with the civil servants. So in terms of the governance, and as we know, the governance system in Britain is badly broken. So, contrary to popular belief, we do not live in a democracy in the UK. We live in a constitutional monarchy that slowly over 100 years of socialism has been altered to a state where it no longer functions. Okay? Now, Churchill, going back to Churchill in 1945, did warn us this was coming. In 1945, Churchill said, if you carry on with socialism, you will need political policing because it won't survive without it. And what will continue to happen is the civil servants will no longer be civil and they will no longer be servant and they will be in these vast bureaucracies. All right? So as we see, Parliament isn't working properly because the MPs just fall into line with the way that they're whipped. And the power sharing arrangement that we should have, which is a tripartite system of Crown, which is permanent, okay? We kind of elect the king, if you did but know it, in the way that that works. And then you have the Commons, which we elect is the democratic bit, okay? And then we have the House of Lords, okay? So that's the way the system should work. It's power sharing, but it should be democratically led, okay, with the MPs and the ministerial bit. But obviously that's not working because, as we know from people like Suella Braverman as the minister, so the ministers are not in charge anymore. It's the permanent secretaries that hold all the power, and that's since Tony Blair's interference and the constitutional vandalism that he was cited for. Okay, so the civil servant command chain for this is David Williams, then Ollie Robbins, then it goes to Jonathan Powell, who is Tony Blair's ex-2IC, and then it goes to the Cabinet Secretary, Chris Wormald. They hold all the power. The ministers are irrelevant. They can just say yes. That's it. Okay? Now, this is the good bit. The only thing that can stop and reset this is the MPs and Parliament. There is no other instrument in this country available to the people to do anything about this other than that. So without a quorum of effective MPs to push back or resistance in Parliament, and as I've said, Parliament has been silent on this. Now you would think defence and security with war in Europe would be at the front and centre, but it's very quiet, isn't it? Now I'd had it on good authority from several senior military officers that Rishi Sunak did not want to be a wartime Prime Minister, and that is why he pulled back and wanted the general election. I can only assume, and I don't do that regularly because assumptions are the mother of all mistakes, is that Starmer was okay in being a wartime PM. But what he's not told everyone is that we are actually at war with our adversaries. Now, what I want you to think about is going forward with this pact. So currently the first thing the Labour government did was they delayed everything with what the military officers were saying about, well, our military is woefully under-kitted, it's woefully understaffed, we need to increase fighting capability rapidly now. Okay, and they are correct. The expertise and the experience lays with them, but then, as I've said, they're not really in power, and they can't speak. Even at the latest conference they just had, they were precluded from speaking. And I don't know anybody know the first Sea Lord has just been sacked? Yeah. Have you seen this? Okay, well, actually Ben Kay had spoke out about diversity targets. Okay, that was formally. And the other thing he'd done was questioned, I understand, the review, which the current Labour view looked very much like a delaying tactic because Starmer had already said he wanted to go with the EU. So we'll have a defence review nationally, differentiate between national and EU, yeah? That review is looking like it's going to come back without quantum, and the procurement orders and the defence contracts will be delayed and deferred until October, okay? Now, what if by then we're on a war footing? Just think about that. What does that mean? If Starmer takes us to a war footing and the EU go to a war footing, how will anyone say no to this? Because Ursula has said she wants command and control from Brussels. Okay, now if you go into the unification process, it's huge, obviously. Consider this, you want to unify all of the military and security services in Europe. It's enormous, okay? So we've got all these patchwork of national militaries and national capabilities to bring it all into one unified arrangement. All right, it is an enormous process. So I believe the start of it will be on the 19th, where he will formally go in. Obviously, we've had this shenanigans previously where they've tried to hide it in plain view, and that hasn't worked. So, our officers are an interesting situation at the moment because obviously we've had a chronology from 1981 with Admiral Henry Leach not going round to number 10 and saying to Maggie, you're not selling those aircraft carriers, and all this fallout with John Knott. Do you remember that? When John Knott had the up and the down with Robin Day about why should we trust you, a mere transient minister? And obviously John Knott threw his teddy out and stormed off and all the rest of it. But those officers were speaking out then. Now, slowly what's happened over a period of time, as we've gone through this cutting process, yeah? We're all aware of defence cuts, aren't we? Yeah? But if Blair had said, or Cameron had said, well, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the national defence because ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to do that through the EU. And because of the way that collectively the amount of capability in Europe works is we nationally don't need this much because if we put it all together with the EU, we've got more than enough to deal with the adversaries, okay? And it'll be cheaper, okay? But they've not done that, but they've just sort of done the cutting, and now we've got to the point where the British military cannot function. Now, I sat behind General Sir Richard Barrons in Defence Committee in 2018 with two other heads of service, head of the Navy and head of the Air Force, and Barrons told all the MPs at Select Committee, no ifs or buts, the British Army is not fit for purpose and we should not be in this position. We currently have threats that we cannot deal with and we should not be in that position. Yeah? We can all agree with that. That's absolutely right. We shouldn't be, all right? You know, how safe do you feel? Yeah? Just an aside, in terms of national security, how safe do you feel? So just part the military for a minute. You feel safe? Right, so you've hit the nail on the head. So no border control, there's no such thing as national security. It is an illusion, I can assure you. And there are even people, the government academics are even saying that, you know, that our national security status at the moment is but an illusion. We don't have it. What I kind of want to conclude with is really this destination where Starmer's going with this, because he needs to be challenged on it. Because there will be bills. This isn't for free, okay? So they're already talking about huge sums of money and the defence contracts. Now, the defence contracts are critical because many years ago, in about 2019, I sat in on a 1922 Tory backbench defence committee meeting, and they were discussing what would happen with common European procurement and what that would mean for UK defence companies like Rolls-Royce, Babcock, BAE, and all the rest of it, and all the small and medium businesses that anchor off that. That all they were bothered about, all the big Tory bigwigs were bothered about the defence contracts. But what they did not and would not accept is that it would be single point defence procurement, that it would be the EU in charge of capital procurement budgets. That's the critical bit. Now, if you command the money and you make the kit and you decide that you make that and you make that, and Britain, you're not, let us have the fishing. You see, this is cropping up at the minute, isn't it? Fishing with this in the media. Fishing and defence seem to be sandwiched, right? It's a bit of a distraction, a red herring, forgive me. They're using it as a sort of, no, we've been through all this nonsense with the Panavia tornado. We get to the stage where, BAE doesn't even make an aircraft anymore. What use is that? This is nonsense. So we're going to see such step changes in defence and security with this that it will probably be breathtaking. Now, years ago, the senior officers used to do the speaking out through the guys that were 2 years out. But at the moment, it's gone very, very quiet because of, obviously, the war in Europe. What it will need is public pressure. You will have to force your MP, one way or the other, to start to engage in this. Now, one of the mechanisms that they've used previously on this, so I'm forewarned, forearmed, when we campaigned on this issue in the referendum and in GE19 with Theresa May, trying to formally slip us in. Now, I was very lucky because I got Anne Widdecombe to air this, and Anne Widdecombe pushed back against it with what was then the Brexit Party, and she said no to it, like Maggie did, because obviously the critical thing, and I cannot stress this enough, surely, there is no sovereignty at all without sovereignty in defence and security. None. Now, Anne understood that. She was a sort of Maggie Thatcher type. Her politics were very similar in that respect. And there was enough resistance back then to stop it. Now, obviously, we've got the Labour government in, and they're proceeding with this. So the backstory really is where are the rest of all of these people at the moment currently? Utterly silent. They're consenting to it. So I understand what's happening is that the party politics, all right, the way it works, they're going to let Starmer do this, they're going to let him sign it, and then start to talk about it. So it'll be, horse and stable door territory. So it'll become, at the point that he's done it and it's academic and we're in, they're then going to start to have a conversation. You get who I'm talking about with this politically, don't you? Do I have to name them? Yes. Reform? Yeah. They know all about it. I was working with their former defence spokesperson, Colonel Frederick Cheetham. Interestingly, like a lot of our officers, worked in the EU on all this, knew all about it. He was all ready to go with the campaign, and the poor chap had a heart attack right at the end of the COVID period. So it all just parked at that point. So nothing's happened. I'll take questions at the end. The apolitical silence is something we have to break. Now, one of the big problems we found before with this is when you write in, all right, what the MPs do and their researchers, it's a difficult letter, it's about security, it's about defence and security. Won't even read it. The researcher just sends it to something called the Policy Research Unit in the Cabinet Office. So you get a reply, and believe you me, I've proved this, it's academic. So when we did this before, it could be any constituent anywhere in the country, any MP, didn't make any difference, right? You got the same letter back from the Cabinet Office, just with a different letterhead and a different MP's name on everything's fine, nothing to worry about, nothing to see, move on, blah, blah, blah. Normally they'd put in there NATO was the cornerstone of our defence and there's no such thing as an EU army. So this is the sort of stuff that they'd come back with. So I think really what we've got to look at with this is without Starmer being challenged, effectively now at this period, then it would be academic that this thing will just go on a set of rails. And one thing you've got to bear in mind is when Starmer, now he's just had what appears to be some kind of political military planning meeting with Macron and Merz and Tusk last week, give or take, over in Kiev. All right. So what it looks like, if you sort of read the mood music there, is right. Okay, let's do this with the EU, and so on and so forth. Now, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, our adversaries do not have any problem whatsoever with the EU doing this. They're fine with it. And do you know how I know that? They're totally quiet on it. It doesn't get a mention. Okay? Now, I'll take questions at the end, just a moment. So when Starmer and people like Blair, now Blair's an interesting one because in 2018 he fezzed up to this at the Munich Defence Conference. It's an interesting place to do it, isn't it? And what he said was, it doesn't help the Brexit case if you explain this being Defence and Security Union, properly. But as far as I'm concerned, it is absolutely essential, and he exaggerated it, that we have our own capabilities that are strong. And what you have to understand is when Blair and Starmer say we or our, he means the EU, not the UK. You just have to, that's a tiny little bit of code, but a little's a lot, okay? So you can see where this is coming because the way it's been engineered, we've got Jonathan Powell as National Security Advisor, Tony Blair's 2IC. He believes this is essential. Now, we saw this with Lovegrove, who was the Permanent Secretary at the MOD and the National Security Advisor. Bearing in mind, ladies and gentlemen, what did Lovegrove do for a job before he came into the British government? Anyone? A background in defence and security or engineering or defence industry? No? What did he do? He was a Deutsche Banker. And I understand it was mergers and acquisitions of European media companies. So I'm going to conclude really with, I'm going to reiterate again that there is no sovereignty at all without sovereignty in defence and security. And this, from a general that led the brigade in the Falklands, Major General Julian Thompson, stated when Theresa May tried to blag this in the backstop. He said it was the biggest surrender of sovereignty since the surrender in Singapore in World War II. But actually, ladies and gentlemen, it's worse than that, because Ursula wants the industry as well. And I want you all to think what that means for what little defence industry we have left in this country and what little manufacturing and engineering capability we have. Because once Ursula issues the kit, and it's European, doesn't matter whatever it is, a ship, a tank, a gun, whatever, and they're using this ammunition thing at the moment as a huge lever. Because Ben Wallace obviously supported the Ukraine very rapidly with the shoulder-launched rocket launchers and all the 155 ammunition and all the rest of it. Now, our arsenals are drained nationally. They're as weak as they've ever been. And the Labour government are not replenishing the magazines. Those procurement orders are not working in the moment. So what you're going to see is Ursula wants the procurement. Now, once she issues the ammunition, what happens? She gets to decide what happens to that ammunition, doesn't she? And as Lord Attlee said, and our friend Churchill, it's a dictatorship of bureaucrats. Who will say no? And that was the second point that Julian Thompson made, along with General Sir Mike Rose, Major General Tim Cross, Colonel Richard Kemp, Rear Admiral Roger Lane, not Polaris Admiral, who I had the fortune to run along in parallel with, both in the referendum and in the May shenanigans, that they all said, who will say no? Because when she takes command, you will have troops and whatever from all over Europe clubbed together under an EU officer, who then says no. How does our government then say no? Well, it's the Prime Minister's policy to do it. Parliament isn't going to stop it, and Parliament will not and this is the worry, on a war footing. When the British government moves to a war footing, who will say no? Thank you.